My first job this afternoon really is to say it's a great pleasure to welcome back to Washington, D.C. and to Georgetown University, Joshua McElwee. Josh, as many of you will know, has spent almost 5 years covering Pope Francis and the Catholic Church from Rome as the Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Reporter. And he has travelled the world on the papal plane, accompanying Pope Francis on nearly every single international papal visit. His reporting and feature writing have earned numerous awards from the Catholic Press Association and the Religious News Writers Association. Josh actually studied here in Washington, D.C. at the Catholic University of America across town, and he has reported for NCR from 21 different countries. He is the author of 10 Things Pope Francis Wants You to Know About the Family from Ligori Publications, and also is the co-editor alongside Cindy Wooden of a Pope Francis lexicon published by Liturgical Press. So who better to come to talk to us about Pope Francis and some of the events in the church today? Josh was the first journalist to break the news of Pope Francis's decision in 2016 to create a commission to study the possibility of ordaining women to the Catholic diaconate, for which the Catholic Press Association awarded him and 2 other NCR writers its Best News Writing honour that year. In 2014, while previously working here as NCR's national correspondent in Washington, McElwee broke news of 2 separate secret investigations of bishops accused of mishandling or committing sexual abuse. And in 2013, he broke news of Francis's call for parish-level input before the 2014 Synod of Bishops. So Joshua is a proven journalist with great knowledge, who has won awards for his stories, and who has been up close to what is happening in the Vatican in recent years, but also, of course, is a native from the United States, being from Chicago. So who better to help us talk about some of the crises that's been facing the church in recent times? The revelations in Pennsylvania, the revelations in Chile and Peru, across Europe, the news about Cardinal McElwee, the news about Cardinal Wuerl's impending resignation. These and some other questions are things we want to discuss with Josh today, as well as his sense of how people in Rome are reacting to these things and what hope there might be for the future for the church to move beyond this crisis. So just to begin, Josh, can you tell us a little bit about what's it been like to be in the Vatican these past weeks with these many depressing and shocking revelations, ushering yet another period of crisis in the church? How are people responding in Rome and in the Vatican in particular?
Well, let me say first, thank you for having me. I don't know if I've been described before as having great knowledge, so I'll do my best to show great knowledge even when I don't have it. Yeah, it's been a difficult few weeks, and I think I don't know a sense of as well what it feels like in the United States. Oftentimes in Rome, what happens in the U.S., there's a bit of it feels almost like an echo. You're hearing it from very far away. And I think, at least at the beginning, certainly at the release of the grand jury report in Pennsylvania, there wasn't so much concern. It didn't register immediately how big this moment was, particularly for Catholics in the U.S. You remember it took several days for the Vatican to release its first statement, which was a statement from the press office about the Pope taking this seriously, wondering what to do next. And it's felt very hectic since. We're wondering, on a personal level, I was afraid to make this trip because things have been happening so quickly. And you're waking up every morning wondering, okay, what's the bulletin from the press office going to say today? And so I've been waking up at 6 a.m. here in Washington because that's noon in Rome when the bulletin comes out. So I've been not wanting to miss anything. And I think we're waiting now to see what the Vatican might say about that letter from Archbishop Vigano. And it's really a sense of a waiting time. Last week there was the news that the Pope is calling the heads of all the national bishops' conferences to Rome, which I think is quite extraordinary. It's never been done before, at least for this purpose, and certainly to give focus to the issue, to bring them all to Rome in February, to discuss, not clear what they're going to discuss, but probably action in some sense. So it's a bit of a waiting time and a bit of wondering what will happen next. And I'm going from here back to Rome. On Saturday, the Pope goes to the Baltic countries of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And obviously that's when we get the chance to ask the Pope questions on the way back. And so I'm wondering what's going to happen there and if he's going to say something much more strongly at that moment about the current atmosphere and the current crisis.
So you were recently with Pope Francis in Ireland when he was on his apostolic visit there, and while he was in Ireland, the Pennsylvania grand jury revelations had just come out, and Archbishop Vigano's letter came out while he was still in Ireland. What was the mood on the ground amongst Irish people, and what did you sense was the mood of Irish bishops? And also, how did Pope Francis seem in his demeanour at these revelations?
Well, I think there has to be credit given to Pope Francis for choosing to go to Ireland. Mm-hmm. It was his choice, and it came about after the visit to the United States in 2015. He was here for the World Meeting of Families, and he chose that the next World Meeting of Families would be in Ireland 3 years from then. So he chose to go to Ireland, and he knows that there's certainly been issues and things coming to light about the horrific stories of both clergy and institutional abuse in Ireland, and so he chose to go to that country for that purpose. I think, partly for that purpose, to address that issue. Obviously, there was concern that he was not putting forward action steps. So on the first day of the trip to Ireland, he met with the President and the Prime Minister, and he did acknowledge the pain of sexual abuse. He said it's a grievous crime. He said that children and vulnerable adults had been let down, but he didn't say what he was doing next to make sure they were protected going forward or to hold those who had done wrong to account, especially bishops who had covered up for abusers. And so I was speaking to clergy sexual abuse victims in Ireland, particularly Marie Collins, who is the former abuse survivor, former member of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Children. And so the first day of that trip was very much, well, he said something, but he didn't say everything. And then we got word that he had met with 8 abuse survivors that same evening, including Marie Collins. And it seemed that there had been something happened in that moment, that he had listened to these survivors. I don't know if you heard the story here, but apparently we were told by one of the survivors in the meeting, he referred to the covering up of sexual abuse as caca, so something really bad. And that was strong. And then he had promised the survivors that he would speak about it in a different way the next day, which he did. When he had the Mass in Dublin, he had a litany of lament for what the church had done, and it was much more serious and much more specific, particularly about institutional abuse in Ireland. Unfortunately, that was also marred by Archbishop Vigano in that morning about, I think, 4 a.m. in Europe, we were in Dublin getting up to go to Knock, which is a couple hundred miles west, for a long day, and Vigano decided this was the time to release his 11-page document. And I think you have to say immediately it was unfair to the Pope to release a document full of such allegations, such lengthiness, when he wouldn't have time to read it, really, and to consider what was being said and how to respond. I think at the moment, the Pope's response, essentially we as journalists knew we would have to ask immediately on the plane home about the letter. And of course, it fell to the English language journalists because we ask questions in language groups, and it's always the English language journalists who are forced to ask the clergy abuse question, and that gives us a really good reputation among the other journalists. So we asked the Pope 2 specific questions about the letter, whether they were true, and he decided at that moment that he wouldn't respond. He asked us to do our job to investigate the claims, and so the document would speak for itself. And I think not because he asked us to, but because it's our job, we've done that. There's been a lot of investigation into the document, into the claims, bringing to light some issues about it. But we still haven't had any more from the Vatican. And so I'm wondering if we're going to see more refuting or rebutting specific claims. And if we don't, I think the Pope is going to be put in a precarious position on the way home from the Baltics because he'll be asked. And so if there's not something for him to refer to, he's going to be on his own in a sense. And I'm wondering what the strategy is there. So I think maybe I'll leave it at that.
So what's your take on the Vigano letter? I mean, some people are suggesting this is part of a plot to undermine Pope Francis by his arch-conservative critics on both sides of the Atlantic. And of course, this isn't the first time Vigano has been found to be undermining Pope Francis. When he was visiting here, of course, the whole story of Kim Davis being ushered into the back door of the nunciature just down the road. What are people saying in Rome about Vigano's letter, and is it being seen as part of a wider plot to undermine Pope Francis?
I think for those who know a little bit about Archbishop Vigano, the immediate question was, what is behind this? And it was tough to know. In the 11-page document, it named specific dozens of people in the church, in the upper echelons of the hierarchy, made specific allegations, and then mixed those allegations with a really strange ideological tint, alleging that there was a pro-gay agenda in the church, saying some bishops were homosexualist. I'm not even sure what that means. And so it was unclear how to take this immediately. I do think that the two main allegations that were made in the document that the Vatican has not responded to are quite significant. And the one is that Pope Benedict had placed some sort of sanctions on Cardinal McCarrick around 2009, 2010. And the second being that Vigano claimed he had spoken to Francis personally about this in 2013. And so I think we're at a moment where those questions are left open. The Pope has decided on August 26th not to respond directly. There's been some investigation of both claims. It appears to the first claim about the sanctions, there's been some reporting that it doesn't appear that there were sanctions. There might have been some sort of quiet order to McCarrick from Pope Benedict to keep a low profile. Unclear what that would mean. Also, it was very clear that McCarrick was still traveling around the world, was still acting on behalf of the Holy See under Benedict and Francis. So I wonder what's going to be said about that. The second claim about Vigano telling Francis, I'm not sure if we'll ever have a direct answer on that, but because of the character of the man and how we've seen him act in public before, I wonder the trustworthiness of that claim. And particularly now that there has been video of that meeting, because it came at a public event at the Vatican where they were taking video of the Pope greeting each person. And the first few moments of that encounter were captured on video, and Catholic News Service made that available on their Twitter account. And it seems quite jovial. It doesn't seem like there was a serious conversation going on. They're both laughing. And so I wonder just how credible that claim is. So at this point, I think those are the two questions. I'm not sure about the second, but I think on the first, the Vatican could say something in public that they haven't said yet, which is to clarify if there were these sanctions, what they were, and how that broke down.
Okay, thanks. So when the Pennsylvania revelations came to light recently, the head of the USCCB, Cardinal Donato, said that we already know that one root cause is the failure of episcopal leadership, and he called this present crisis a moral catastrophe. Do you think his statement and actions so far have gone far enough? And what's your sense of what was discussed when Pope Francis met with the representatives of the USCCB, including Cardinal Donato last week?
Up to this point, we don't know what was discussed. It was very interesting. Cardinal Donato had asked for the meeting on behalf of the U.S. Bishops' Conference. Coming with him was Archbishop Gomez, the vice president, and also Monsignor Bransfield, the Secretary General. But it's not clear, but I think it's from the Pope's initiative. It's interesting that he also asked Cardinal O'Malley to attend, who is Archbishop of Boston and the head of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. So it wasn't just the three U.S. bishops' representatives, but also someone in the middle, an archbishop in the United States who is also serving on a papal commission. I don't know what's coming. I think that this bishops' meeting in Baltimore is going to be very significant. It's clear to me that the Cardinal Donato or the U.S. bishops are coming up with some sort of plan. I think particularly for what will happen when there are allegations against the bishop, being the great question left since the 2002 response. And I don't know at this point what they're putting forward. Apparently, there's been some Italian reporting that they presented the Pope with some options, basically saying, if we did this, would it be possible under canon law? And I don't envision the Pope would give them any hard time. But I don't know. I think it's going to also be up to what happens at the floor of the Bishops' Conference, what support they have, how the other bishops are feeling in this moment, and how far they can go in terms of empowering lay people or empowering non-bishops to investigate these allegations. What I think is going to happen is some sort of panel to investigate these allegations and then forward them to the Apostolic Nuncio, the ambassador. But I don't know. And so I think we're waiting to see exactly what the bishops are going to decide to do.
So it seems the stumbling block remains what it's been for a very long time, the lack of accountability and processes of accountability for holding bishops who are guilty of covering up abuse to account. Mary Collins, who you've met many times and have interviewed in the past, when she met with Pope Francis in Ireland, she specifically asked him, was he going to set up a tribunal to hold bishops to account who were found to be guilty of covering up abuse? And Pope Francis resisted that. Why do you think this resistance continues for such accountability? And why do you think the original papal commission to investigate abuse really ground to a halt and fell apart? Why would somebody such as Mary Collins, who's such a determined and quietly spoken, resolute campaigner, would resign from that commission? What is the stumbling block here? Why is accountability still being resisted in that form?
Well, the first thing I would say is I find Marie to be one of the most extraordinary people I've ever met or known. Her diligence and fair-mindedness is incredible, especially after she has suffered what she has suffered, not only in the abuse, but in trying to bring to light what was going on in Ireland and how bishops treated her, and especially how Vatican officials have treated her. A side note here that doesn't answer your question, but part of why I was so frustrated when Archbishop Vigano's letter had come out was it was a very long day. That first trip in Ireland, I was exhausted, and I had been trying to get in touch with Marie after she met with the Pope to talk to her about what had happened, because we wanted to write a story. And it was 11:30 at night. We were both exhausted, and we had an interview. And so I worked on the interview until about 1 a.m., and then I had to get up at 3 a.m. to go to knock. And I thought, oh, I've got a real exclusive. I've spoken to Marie Collins. She told me the Pope said he's not doing the accountability tribunal. I've got it ready. I'm going to publish it in the morning. I get up in the morning, and Vigano released his letter. So my exclusive wasn't so important. But I think the question of the accountability tribunal is the question at the moment. We asked the Pope about it on the trip home from Ireland, why he had chosen not to do it, and why he had then told Marie he was still not going to do it. All he said to us was that it was not viable, but he didn't explain why. He said that instead of one single tribunal, the proposal was to have one single tribunal at the Vatican to evaluate bishops who were accused of mishandling abuse allegations against clergy. So, and it was put forward in, I guess, 2016 as a papally approved measure, but then never put in place. And instead, the Pope signed a new document, a motu proprio, giving 4 Vatican offices the authority to begin these types of proceedings. And we don't know why the Pope decided to go that route. He told us that he's doing a case-by-case basis, tribunals as necessary, and that he even said that there had been many bishops judged in this way, which to me raises the question of where's the transparency? If this is going on, why don't the people of God know? Especially if there's a bishop who is thought to have done something so wrong that there might be a need to remove him from office. And he doesn't tell us why. And I think there's answers due there. And I wonder if there would be a moment for him to meet with Marie outside of the papal visit, when there would be time to have a constructive meeting away from the limelight to really work through this and what's been decided and why. And Marie was in Rome. We had dinner together, and she'd written an article for my newspaper, National Catholic Reporter, mentioning that she would be in Rome, and never heard anything. So I don't know what the most productive way forward is, and I don't know where it's going to go. I think if there's not transparency about this, it just festers, and people will rightly wonder what is going on and why don't we know about it. And I don't know if the Pope is aware of that. And I wonder if that's something that will happen in February when the heads of the bishops' conferences come. Perhaps some of them could raise this issue.
And is that part of the problem? So Cardinal Donato has asked the Vatican to come and investigate the US Catholic Church. But at the core of the cover-ups lie policies that were rolled out worldwide by previous Vatican administrative departments and officials themselves, and are still, it would seem, being defended by some, even in Rome and elsewhere. If the Vatican's own papal commission on these issues floundered amidst resignations, then there's clearly still deep-seated institutional malaises at the Church's core, of which the abuse crisis is obviously sadly an acute symptom. How can those potentially infected by a morally malignant institutional culture be expected to investigate the same failings elsewhere? The church's own term for this is social sin. Would it not be better for there to be a more independent and autonomous mechanisms for investigating when the cover-ups are taking place and how they can be brought to a halt?
Yeah. So my great fear after the Pennsylvania report is that it's going to be like this for a very long time, because I think attorneys general are going to realize this is a winner. It's a good issue,
Right.
and they can bring to light what happened, but it's not going to happen all at once. In 2002, I think we can say the bishops did a lot, and they can justly take credit for putting in place measures and norms that protect children. And I think the data bears that out, that for the most part, there are aberrations, but children are being protected, that the procedures are working. But what I see is that there was never a pull off the Band-Aid moment for the U.S. Church to investigate what had happened in every diocese in the country for 100 years. And so every time we do this piecemeal now, we're going to learn again how awful it was, but just in a different location. And I wonder, in Australia, they've had this Royal Commission. It didn't just look into the church, it looked into institutional sexual abuse in various areas. But there was an inquiry, essentially. There was a long, dedicated inquiry to figure out what had happened, what had gone wrong, and then to write a report. And I know that might not be possible in that fashion here because of our protection of religious freedom, and there'd be questions about that. But I wonder, until we have that moment, will we just keep kind of going forward thinking, oh, we've handled the problem, and then another jurisdiction decides to have an investigation and we learn more about what had happened there in the 1970s and 80s. And so I don't think it's up to the church. I think it's up to independent authorities to hold investigations and to learn what happened and how the church reacted and whether it reacted poorly or not. And I wonder what we're going to see develop in that area.
I mean that's part of the reason why people are so rightly angry and disappointed now. We're nearly 20 years after the huge revelations in places like Ireland and Boston and elsewhere. We're still talking about the same issues. The Boston revelations emerging in 2002, the Spotlight team at the Boston Globe relentlessly persevered without giving in to pressure from prominent Catholics to desist. But yet Cardinal Law was allowed to leave without facing justice and carry on in a prominent role in Rome for many years. And that was a further affront to all the victims and survivors of clerical abuse around the globe. He was protected by the institution and paid no price for those crimes. But did the church learn any lessons from that? So here in Washington, D.C., Catholics have been rocked twice in recent weeks. First, the Cardinal McElwee revelations, now the impending resignation of Cardinal Donald World. Why do you think people like McElwee and World, amongst others, can continue to carry on in their ministry for so many years despite the overwhelming evidence of one being guilty of multiple abuses of his position and the other guilty of covering up and moving around abusers on a serial basis, according to the Pennsylvania grand jury report?
I think I'd want to be very careful about drawing analogies between Cardinal World and Cardinal Law. I think there is a lot of question about what was raised in the Pennsylvania grand jury report, especially about how Cardinal World handled several priests in the early 1990s. But I think there's also a lot to be praiseworthy about how he handled priests, especially in the one case where he fought the Vatican hard for 3 years to keep a predator priest out of ministry, even though he had been ordered to put that person back into ministry. And I know there's questions about how he handled other cases, and I know that the Cardinal did not, his answer to the report was certainly not productive. To your question about what happens, I think, maybe I'm naive. I've been covering the church for a decade. I've been covering abuse longer, and I've worked for NCR. We've started covering the abuse crisis in 1985. We were the first national paper to do so. I don't think Cardinal Law would have received the same treatment today that he received in 2002. I just can't imagine that the pressure brought to bear on the Vatican in this environment would allow that to happen. But that's not to say that there are institutional mechanisms in place to ensure that it does not happen. I think it would be more that the atmosphere would be so toxic, they would know better. But that doesn't mean, there's not the mechanism in place. And the mechanism is some sort of way to hold bishops accountable. Is some sort of structure that when questions are raised about how bishops have mishandled abuse, they are judged and it's made public and they're not allowed to resign, they are fired. And that mechanism is not in place. And I think that's one of the great questions about this papacy. Is the Pope going to do something like that, like he promised, like Cardinal O'Malley announced in 2016, or is he not? And right now he's not, but I don't know if that might change based on what he's being faced with now and the new revelations.
So when Pope Francis issued his letter in the wake of the Pennsylvania revelations and the other recent revelations to the people of God recently, he was denouncing the moral failings of the cover-ups once again and pledging solidarity and taking the side of victims, and that was very welcome. And he was really talking about the need to transform ecclesial culture, particularly the culture of clericalism, and how the laity should be involved in making more crucial decisions throughout the church. Do you think that's likely to come to pass anytime soon? And do you think it's time for a fully independent and lay-led commission to be set up to address the systemic institutional corruption and corrosion within the church concerning abuse once and for all?
Something that came to, it's been part of conversations recently, was whether there should be, beyond the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors, some sort of office at the Vatican tasked with answering all abuse claims or basically being the clearinghouse. Right now it's more or less the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which has the power to remove priests and to answer allegations. For example, when the allegation in Vigano's letter that he told the Pope personally in 2013 about McCarrick, in a secular institute, even in the Church of England, the response would be, don't talk to me about this. Don't tell me a word more. Don't talk to me. Go to my child protection office. Tell them everything you know and go through them. And there's not really a mechanism at the Vatican for that. The Pope receives this information, or is alleged to receive this information, where in a secular world you would say, no, you go directly to the child protection people and you tell them everything they need to know. And we don't have that really. I mean, the Pope, I guess, could direct him to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, could say at that point, go talk to Cardinal Muller. But that doesn't exist. And the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Children is very clear that its job is not to look into the past or to look into specific cases, but to basically to advise the Pope on how to put measures in place going forward. So I think there's a gap there, and I think that's something that could be addressed.
Yeah, what's your sense of the nature of that gap? Because Pope Francis, when he came in, seemed to be advocating a zero-tolerance approach to clerical abuse, and many in the church felt finally something can be done now that will have long-term effects to eradicate this from the church as fully as possible. But we know people like Mary Collin resigned because some of the dicasteries were ignoring communications from victims of abuse, particularly the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. What's the stumbling block that's standing in the way of Francis's zero-tolerance policy becoming as uniformly rolled out around the church across the globe as the previous culture was for covering up and moving around abusive priests rolled out across the globe?
I think one of the questions is, it's hard to create policies. I mean, the Pope is in charge of the entire world. And so it's hard to know how to create policies in each different country, and particularly how in certain countries, if he put into canon law that it was obligatory for a bishop to report all crimes to authorities, I don't know how that would work in certain countries in Africa, or how that would work in certain countries in Asia, and what that would look like. And I think there are real questions there that have to be addressed, and I don't think they've been addressed in public. And so I don't know, in terms of zero tolerance, it's clear that at the proceedings at the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the Pope has made it clear that if it's proven, it's done. take them out of ministry, laicize them if it's appropriate. But I don't know about reporting to authorities, and I don't know how the church is navigating that issue as a universal global policy. Mm-hmm. Certainly, bishops' conferences have followed the U.S. model since 2002 in countries where that's, certainly in Western countries. I don't know in other societies how that would work.
So do you think it's time for a very different approach then to the mentality that's prevailed in the last 3-4 decades, which quite often would be when a diocese was clearly subject to revelations on a systemic basis across many years with regard to covering up abuse, that a troubleshooting bishop would be parachuted in? And we were just hearing about the latest resignation of a bishop just last week, and Laurie is being sent in to be the troubleshooter. Cardinal Archbishop was sent to Boston to be the troubleshooter and clashed with lay groups calling for justice in the church at that time, and there were some very painful things went on in those years in Boston. Cardinal Wuerl himself was sent in as a troubleshooter to Pittsburgh. Is it time for a different type of bishop and a different type of strategy? And where will those bishops come from, if so?
A different strategy for dealing with abuse? Or?
A different strategy, instead of the priority is to troubleshoot in the best interest of the institution rather than in the best interest of justice.
I think the Pope's reforms about who he wants to be bishops have been extraordinary. And I think that's key. Mm-hmm. Who are we making bishops? What's their number one goal? And all of this the smell of the sheep model, yeah. It's become something of a trite saying, but it really means something. If you've got someone in the role mm-hmm. whose first priority is taking care of people, of being decent and kind, and not protecting the institution at all costs, that leads to very different results down the line. Mm-hmm. And I think we're seeing some of that fruit pay off. The Pope has made a wide number of appointments in the U.S. Church. I was looking at the numbers yesterday. In the next 2 years, there's going to be about 20 bishops to resign. Mm-hmm. So in the next 2 years, 20 more Pope Francis appointees. And in next year, the head of the Congregation for Bishops, Canadian Cardinal Mark Ouellet, will turn 75. And the Pope could choose at that moment to put a new person in that job, the key role of advising the Pope on who should be bishops around the world. So I think if you're looking for a shift away from the troubleshooting bishop, I think the Pope has been pretty clear about who he wants to be bishop and what a bishop should be concerned about. Mm-hmm.
So we know Pope Francis is an unswerving advocate of social justice. But 2 questions in relation to that. Do you think this crisis could detract from his efforts to promote social justice on so many other important issues, migration, poverty, nuclear weapons, war in general, the environment, and so on? And second, how might the Church better learn to apply its own social teachings to its own failings more consistently to its lasting missional benefit?
Well, I think for the first part of the question, I think until we answer this, nothing else matters. And there won't be any energy to mm-hmm. consider what the Church says on anything until people feel that children and vulnerable adults and people in subordinate positions in the Church are being protected and have mechanisms to say when they're being harmed, and to be sure that those who harm them and those who cover up for those who harm them are held accountable. And I think that until that's answered, many people will just turn away, like they did in 2002 when they felt that there wasn't an effective change coming. In terms of applying its own teachings to the social sin?
Its own social teachings to its own failings. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I guess one teaching that the Pope is applying is subsidiarity. Mm-hmm. The idea that action should be taken at the most local level when appropriate, and then go up the chain as necessary. And I think with this meeting in February with the heads of the bishops' conferences, it's an interesting interplay between what should be handled locally and what should be handled mm-hmm. from Rome, what should be centralized. And of course, the Pope is someone who has said he wants to decentralize authority. He's decentralized authority on liturgical translations, for example, which we thought might not be, which 6 years ago we would have said was impossible. But he's bringing the bishops to Rome, apparently to give them some sort of marching orders, and then sending them back to implement them. For a pope of the peripheries, he's basically calling all of the peripheries to Rome and then sending them back out. And I wonder if there's something there in understanding the different uses of how to make decisions at what levels.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a key question, and it's a conundrum, isn't it? That for those who are calling for more subsidiarity and more decentralization, are willing Pope Francis to take a lead in implementing that throughout the Church. What's your sense of what will happen at that meeting when all of the world bishops go to Rome? And I guess Pope Francis's phrase, the English translation of Evangelii Gaudium, called it sound decentralization, but that almost sounds like it's authoritative or permitted. But a better translation would be he spoke of healthy decentralization, which also implies that there could be something such as unhealthy decentralization. And under Pope Benedict, you could say that, as I've said before, that there was an implementation with regard to the abuse crisis of a negative subsidiarity, that Rome washed its hands of what was happening at the local level and left dioceses to flounder in trying to deal with it themselves, and said it was a localized problem, or it was a problem for certain, for example, the English-speaking church world. So what will Pope Francis's steps towards encouraging a healthy decentralization with regard to dealing with these sorts of crises be when he gathers the bishops next year?
The honest answer is I don't know. It was just announced, and it's 6 months away. But what they haven't told us, they've told us that the bishops will come. And it's funny, they were so surprised by this announcement, the Vatican. I think they didn't, I don't know who told who what, but they couldn't even tell us at the press briefing how many bishops' conferences there were in the world, because they weren't prepared for the announcement. But my question is it going to be more than bishops? And particularly, will there be abuse survivors? Mm-hmm. And so what would be most powerful for me would be if there's a moment at the beginning of the meeting for the bishops to be confronted with people from different parts of the world who have been harmed by the church. Because I don't know if bishops in certain parts of the world have that experience, if they know it, if they understand it, if they've heard what it's like. And that would be very powerful if they're confronted with that, and whatever decisions or considerations are given during those 3 days of meetings start from that. And then the bishops go home with that experience. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering if there's going to be that moment, if someone like Marie Collins or any number of other abuse survivors would be invited to do that.
Who else do you think should be invited to that meeting? Who else could help move this forward? And perhaps it could be a learning experience for the bishops, that instead of being in an echo chamber where the institutional ways and means are just replicated over and over, that there could be expertise and experiences from further afield, in addition to the survivors as well. Who else might help the church through that moment?
Any number of lay people. Lay people are qualified, who have worked in the field, who know it, not just from the United States, all over Europe, North Africa. They could invite any number of people in the field of child protection or in the field of law enforcement to talk to them about how they look at the church and what needs to be done. And I don't know if that's going to happen. I hope it will, but I don't know what they're planning.
So coming back closer to home, to the US for a moment, the USCCB is well known to be bitterly divided into factions presently. And that's part of the problem for moving forward on any particular topic, but especially when there's controversial and problematic problems there. What do you think might be the way forward there? And what are people saying in Rome about the American church, given the highly critical comments from people like Antonio Spadaro about the dangers to Pope Francis's reforming agenda coming out of the US church?
Italians just think we're nuts generally. So it's not really known. I mean, it's known at certain levels that there's a great division in the U.S. church, I don't think the ordinary kind of Vatican bureaucrat would understand that, but certainly, as you mentioned, Father Spadaro and others know. I think there's a worry that the U.S. Church is so divided that it's very difficult to come to any decision, or to come to a decision based on facts and not ideological claims or kind of scapegoats. For example, the fear about gay priests, which I think has been really disgusting at times, and it's been rightly kind of combated. Yeah, I don't know. I think it means a lot that the Pope invited Cardinal O'Malley into that meeting with the U.S. bishops in Rome, because I think he knew that there were dynamics at play that he might not understand, and he needed someone there who could help him understand those dynamics, or kind of act as almost an intermediary between those different factions. And I think we could invite any number of people who have worked at the Bishops' Conference who might be in this room to say more.
Okay, that's good. What do you think the Census Fidelium is trying to communicate to church leadership at this time of crisis? And do you think that collective voice will be heard?
I think what I'm hearing is do something, and do it now, and protect children and hold people to account. And I think it is being heard. I don't think it's being heard as loudly in Rome as it is here. I think it takes time for things to kind of make their way across the ocean for Italians to understand how serious something is. But I think it is being heard. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't stop making your voice heard. Yeah.
Okay, let's open up the conversation with your permission to some of the people gathered here, and we've got a microphone which will be pushed around. I think John Borelli had his hand up first there. So just say who you are and where you're coming from.
I'm John Borelli, and used to work at the USCCB, and I'm now here at Georgetown. Do you think Pope Francis will go as far as apologizing for the failures of his predecessors in the Roman Curia?
You mean his predecessors as popes?
Yes.
I don't know. I think that would be very difficult for him to do, especially because one of the predecessors is still alive. I think there are, I work for National Catholic Reporter, and we've covered this crisis for a very long time. I think there are a lot of questions, particularly about how John Paul II acted, that haven't really been answered, particularly about the rush to make him a saint, and his handling particularly of the Legionaries of Christ and other cases, and his protection of the institution at all costs. I think Francis has kind of got his handcuffs on these issues, because there's questions about setting precedents and how this will work going forward. And I don't know what he thinks he can say publicly about his predecessors, to be honest.
Kathy Caveney at Boston College and the Library of Congress this semester. When I was thinking about what the Vatican could do, I put my lawyer hat on, and one of the things that occurred to me is that it's easy to say investigation. It's very hard to do one, and it costs a lot of money. So the reason that Pennsylvania could do it was there was a grand jury, and they had subpoena power. Yep. The Mueller investigation has now cost approximately $17 million. So I'm not clear what power, the Vatican would have, say, to compel witnesses to fly to Europe to testify, or to get documents produced and sent over, or to punish people who destroyed documents, or who wouldn't come. And I was just wondering if you've thought about, and maybe, I don't know, maybe that's one of the reasons that Pope Francis thinks a central investigative committee isn't workable. I was just wondering if you heard any discussion about how any of these committees to hold people accountable would actually, one, be funded, and two, operate, and three, compel the testimony they need in order to reach just results.
Well, the church still has excommunication power. That's pretty compelling. I don't think there's a difference, really. If it's at the Vatican or if it's held locally, there's no compelling power. And the money issue is, of course, serious. But I think the main thing is to allow survivors to come forward and have a voice. And so if you had that accountability tribunal, and there was a survivor who said, this priest abused me, this bishop knew, they could come forward in this tribunal. And then it would be up, I suppose, to the bishop to decide whether to respond or not. But if they didn't respond, certainly that wouldn't look so good, and they would probably want to respond. I think for me that the key thing is allowing a place for survivors to come forward, to make the accusation, and for them to be treated seriously.
Okay, who's got the mic? I think there's two here and then down at the front.
Thank you. I'm Peter Kovach, a retired Foreign Service officer and an interfaith activist. I would say I was raised Catholic. A lot of my friends in the other faith traditions I meet with regularly will say to me, and sort of put the stinker in, why don't they allow at least a certain number of priests, teachers who deal with pastoral counseling, who deal with us mortals and our problems, to avoid the vow of celibacy? Is there any move to that, to broadening that? And the second part of that is, they ask also, isn't like counseling for people in the clergy or teachers or nuns that feel they maybe have tendencies that are off the chart to get counseling, a stronger counseling movement?
Well, I think the second question, the mechanisms in place now to evaluate candidates for clergy or for religious life, I think, are quite stringent. And so people go through counseling before they're allowed to continue on in their vocation. So I think that I don't know about. I don't know how it would work once you're ordained, or if you've been ordained for a long time. But I'm sure the mechanism would be that you go to your superior and ask for help. But I don't know if that happens. The first part of your question was. I think there actually has been some talk of this. Even Cardinal Dolan gave an interview last week in which he said he had raised the issue of whether the priest should continue to be mandatory celibate. I don't know how that's going to continue on at the Vatican level. I think the synod, not this year but next year on the Amazon, could be very interesting. It's a special synod for the Amazon region, for the bishops of that region to come to Rome and talk about the special needs that they have. And it really does appear that the issue of celibacy may come up because they're dealing with such a low number of clergy that have to work in such enormous amounts of territory, and whether there might be married men, viri probati, the proven men, that could be of help in that situation. I don't know how that's going to go forward, but I think it's very possible that it could come up in that synod. And the Pope has said before during the synod process, people should speak boldly and say whatever they want without leaving anything on the table. So I think that's very possible that will come up.
Just down there, and then here, and then there.
My name is John Carr. I direct an initiative here at Georgetown on Catholic social thought and public life. Thank you for your good work, Josh, in terrible times. Seems to me three things can be true at once. One, this evil has haunted our church for decades, and our leaders have mishandled it, and the suffering is immense. As you suggested, Gerard, among the victims of this are migrants and poor people and the earth, because the church's voice is being stilled at a time it's needed. Secondly, for Pope Francis, a good Jesuit, silence in the face of attacks may be good spiritual. It's terrible leadership. So one question is, how do people break through and make clear that we have to hear from him on this? And then thirdly, there is evil. The Pope has been slow to respond, but people are obviously, and specifically using this to undermine his leadership in fundamental ways that have nothing to do with clerical sexual abuse. So 2 questions. One, how can the Pope understand that while he may not be hurt by the attacks, the church is being hurt? And what is the resistance to Pope Francis on other issues beyond the United States? And then finally, Josh is going to be a part of a session we're doing tonight with young leaders in town. And a week from tomorrow, we're doing a session here on Gaston Hall on this topic, and there are flyers out there.
It's a traveling show. The first question, the Pope being silent. I think for a while it made a lot of sense. I think the Pope needed to understand what was being alleged, what the facts were, and who was behind it. I think that time has passed. And I'm really wondering what's going to happen and who's going to say what. What we've been told, or what I've been hearing from officials, is that there's going to be some sort of statement, but not from the Pope, probably from the Secretary of State, outlining some of the allegations and bringing forward some other facts that might rebut or give a better picture. But we're still waiting. It hasn't happened. And as I said, my real worry is that if the statement doesn't come before the Pope goes on his next trip on Saturday, it just consumes everything. The whole trip will be about what will the Pope say on the way home, instead of what is he doing in the Baltic countries, which really deserve their own papal visit and deserve, there hasn't been a papal visit to the Baltic since 1993 when John Paul II went, right at beginning of the era after communism. And they're facing their own needs and problems. And they rightly want the Pope to visit them and to discuss their needs and problems. But if the Vatican hasn't addressed this issue, the papal visit again will be about Vigano. So that will be the 3rd papal visit that he's really marred. The second question was about the
resistance to the use of this to undermine Pope Francis, both in this country and around the world.
Well, I think part of the Pope's strategy here is, by giving things time, he allows people kind of to show their cards. And so now he knows very clearly, especially in the U.S. Church, who was saying some very strange things after this Vigano letter. Bishops giving credence to Vigano, saying he's a credible character, and saying nothing about the Pope also being a credible person, or the Pope being an honorable person. And I think there's a bit of, it's almost as if he's watching the chessboard, and now he's seeing where some of the pieces are that he maybe didn't see before. And I think perhaps that, in a weird way, the Vigano letter has been of service in that way.
There was one here, and then we'll move around. Okay, thanks.
In the Boston Spotlight case, the suggestion was made that were it not for the then new editor, Marty Barron, who's now the Washington Post editor, the whole Spotlight case would not have been pursued and brought out of the back pages of the Boston Globe. Because your publication is connected with the church, has that presented special challenges or even disadvantages in pursuing this story? And has there ever been pressure to, hide or block this story in any way?
We've been excommunicated since 1968, so we're free. We're an independent publication, so we were founded in 1964 after the council. We're not owned by any bishop, we're not owned by any religious order, and the reason for that is we want to be independent, and we want to be able to do the journalism we need to do no matter where it leads. There is a bit of a story in our history. The first time we really covered clergy sexual abuse in a concerted way was in 1985. A little-known guy at the time named Jason Berry wrote a story about a priest in Louisiana. I think his name was Gilbert Goth. Horrific stories about how he was treating children. And we immediately decided we needed to cover the story. There was no question about it. Not only that, but in 1985, we wrote a front-page editorial, which for us, and still is, would be very extraordinary. 18 whatever years before Boston, saying if the bishops don't confront this now, it's going to be an incredible problem, and they're going to lose face, and it's going to be the end of the church. And everyone thought we had gone nuts, that we were pursuing one case. And there was actually a vote at our board level. We weren't owned by the bishops or any religious institution, but among our board there was concern that we were taking one case to mar the church. And there was a motion to remove the publisher. There was no second. And since then we've done what we do.
Why do you think it took so long for the Boston Globe to pursue this story until Marty Barron came in, or at least that's what the movie suggested?
Not just the Boston Globe. Every paper in the country could have followed up on what NCR was doing. But I think it took time to realize the scale of the problem. And it wasn't just Marty Barron. I mean, before the Spotlight team, there had been a lot of reporting about incidents in Boston, about individual cases. But I think it took a while to realize that there was a pattern and that there needed to be reporting on the entire pattern.
So just over here, and then there was one here, and then over the table over there as well. Thanks.
Thank you for this excellent discussion today. My name is Isabel Murray, and I'm chairman of the Irish Network in Washington, D.C. I came back from Dublin yesterday, where they're still obviously discussing recent revelations and the Pope's visit. But one of the things that struck me particularly, and I followed up and researched this, and I think I'm correct when I say that 3 out of the 6 survivors who met the Pope on his first day in a somewhat secret visit subsequently said that the Pope seemed not to know about the horror of the Magdalene laundries, and indeed about the Tuam scandal involving the mother and baby home, which was the subject of a very good article in the New York Times last October by Dan McCarthy. Is it credible at all to you as a journalist that the Pope could not have known about these grotesque scandals? And if it is credible, is it not terrifying that the head of one of the largest organizations in the world shows such a remarkable lack of curiosity into such enormously troubling events?
Charitably, I think what I can say is what the Pope said doesn't make sense to me. He met with Philomena, I think in 2015. So he had met with at least one of the survivors. And so I wonder if he didn't know the scale of the problem, or he had met with the survivor and was told kind of quickly about it and didn't realize how enormous and painful and awful the situation was. I don't know why he wouldn't have followed up on it. I don't know why he wouldn't have said to someone next to him, brief me on this later. I don't have an answer. I'm sorry.
Yes, my name is Angela, and I'm not a director of anything. But
Yourself.
But I wonder if you think there's any credibility to the claim that Benedict is somehow behind some of the resistance to Pope Francis.
I don't think there's a sense that Benedict himself personally would be behind any resistance to Francis. I'm not clear at this point how well Benedict is. Last I knew, he was quite sickly. So I don't think even physically he would be able to do that. Certainly people who have a proclivity or prefer Benedict's style of leadership have led parts of the resistance to Francis. I don't have any evidence to say that Benedict himself. In fact, he's made, earlier in the papacy, I think he made extraordinary effort to show that Francis was Pope, and that's how it was. I mean, he took off the zucchetto when he met with Francis the first time. He's come to events very respectfully. I don't think there's any evidence of that.
Okay. So
Hi.
one over here and then over here.
Okay, great. My name's Cynthia Butler. I'm a lawyer in town. I'm a longtime Jesuit fan. I belong to the Jesuit parish, and I went to Georgetown Law School. I don't control or direct anything either. I'm just here. But my question is, why is Wuerl still conducting any kind of a mass? I mean, first of all, being from Pennsylvania, the fact that he was sort of sent in as corporate damage control doesn't mean that he's communicating any kind of sensitivity or awareness of sort of the depravity of the issue. And what he's done since then, he hasn't given people a lot of comfort. I mean, he pretty much lied his way out of, the first bag. When he came back, when he came back from being called to Pope Francis says, go see if you get a thumbs up from your priest, and he got a thumbs down. And he's still hanging around doing like healing masses. He's got 70,000 people on a change petition who want him gone. Every op-ed in the city wants him gone. There are criminal implications to co-conspiracy, right? There's negligent supervision in the civil law, and then there's co-conspiracy. And I'm wondering, is he waiting for Sessions to start his RICO prosecution, or why is he still hanging around? I mean, it doesn't suggest that he has an appreciation for the structural change that has to happen. He's just sort of the parachuted in corporate damage control guy, and he's still spinning. And we know what spin looks like in Washington, and we're really sick of it. So, I mean, why is he still here?
I don't know if I agree with you fully. I think World's going, and I think it's going to happen soon. I think actually the Diocese of Pittsburgh, in their statements, which were written by Ann Rogers, who's a former long-term religion correspondent journalist, covered World in the 80s and 90s for a long time, someone I greatly respect and think is very credible. Their statements on what he did and did not do gave a lot more depth and texture, I think, than World's own statements. And they're worth evaluating, because I don't know if the picture is as black and white as it seems. At any rate, World's going. I don't know when, I don't know how quickly. I think it will happen within days at this point.
Right.
I'm Brian Flanagan from Marymount University, and thank you for being here. So one thing I want to ask about is the greatest proof of the dogma of sin in our world today, or one of them is looking at Twitter and looking at the comments on newspaper stories and seeing how that level of discourse that seems to be mainly an American phenomenon, how that's impacting this. So my question is sort of, one, how is that perceived from Rome? Is this perceived as more nuts Americans, or is the polarization and the viciousness of American political discourse and the seeping in of that into ecclesial discourse being perceived, or how is that being perceived? And the second is, how do you deal with that as an individual and as a person when that is part of the thing you encounter when you log in the morning as well?
Twitter can be a very toxic place. Anything you say can immediately be wrong. For example, when the Pope met with the U.S. bishops, the Vatican released a couple photos of them meeting, and one of them they were smiling. And immediately on Twitter it was a great problem that these men who were meeting on this issue were smiling. But I can imagine that the Pope, who knows he has problems with the U.S. hierarchy and maybe doesn't get along, at the beginning of a meeting would crack a joke to try to lighten the mood. So it's hard. There's not enough time on Twitter or in the social dialogue for texture, for understanding of different points of view, for pulling back the lens a bit to understand a wider story. And I think that that's a problem. And I don't know if, I really don't know if there's an understanding. I mean, with Italian priests I speak to, with Vatican bureaucrats I speak to, they know there's a problem in the U.S. church, they know that there's divisiveness, but I don't think there's an understanding of how bad it is, of how people go to different parishes based on what they want to hear on Sunday, and you don't meet other times. And I don't know how that heals, and I'm a journalist and I don't know how to propose solutions, but I think it's really serious.
Okay, there's one here, and then at the back. Thanks.
Hi, Meg Lyons, also not a director of anything. First of all, to kind of piggyback off of that last comment, this just happens, my dad runs a newspaper in Pennsylvania and was accused of being a Catholic basher for putting this story on the front page. So really just thank you for what you do. Also, I think there's a sense in the American Catholic Church, at least, that we've been waiting since 2002. And like you said, a lot has been done since 2002, but we keep waiting every time these stories get released for what's the Vatican going to do? What are the bishops going to do? What are we going to do to fix this? And I think as Catholics look up and we're like, what's going to be the word? And I also think at this point there's some sense of that can't be the answer anymore because we haven't gotten a good answer. We've gotten some success, but like we said, there's not great accountability, and we don't know when it's going to come or how it's going to come. And I think there's an energy to try to be part of the solution, but not direction to that energy. And do you have any sense that if there's a direction to that from the laity in the American Catholic Church, if there's any movement in that space to be part of the answer beyond people with expertise on the issue that can maybe be invited to the synod, but just the general Catholic laity, if there's a direction that energy is moving in?
Well, I studied politics, so I think about things in that light in terms of making your voice heard and making your demands heard. And I think people in this room and people in Washington have a real advantage in that the bishops' meeting will be held in Baltimore. And it's pretty close. And so there's an opportunity to go and to say something or to be there or to be present or to make your voice known. And I think that would be powerful. I'm not sure what else to say.
Werner, I'm struck by how many lawyers there are here today. I think half the audience might be lawyers if we did a quick head count. But Werner.
Well, Werner Heine, a lawyer indeed in town and a parishioner. And in fact, follow up on this issue. Is there an awareness and a growing awareness among the bishops and the clergy, the hierarchy, that indeed this development has reached a degree that unless the laity, be it for the money they provide to sustain their life, parish life, and certainly bishop's life, and in particular now the way of supporting the Catholic Church requires that the laity has to come in now. The women, we just here in the United States, we have the Me Too movement, and certainly without a lay advice by lawyers, by others who have a certain distance to the clerical life, to the clerical, I would say, the kind of incest thinking, that this, without such an immediate involvement of the laity, might lead to more erosion in the Catholic communities in the United States, and probably lead to greater erosion of faith and certainly of money and what have you. So bottom line is, you feel that the bishops and the bishop conference is seeking advice from the laity, from knowledgeable persons and those of influence, or is this just business as usual?
I don't know so much because I don't live in the U.S. I don't have day-to-day experience with the bishops' conference. But my understanding from very far abroad is that there is an understanding of how serious this is, and they are thinking through how to listen to lay people. I don't know if they're doing enough, and I don't know if the new structure they put in place will empower lay people to give advice and to say things that they don't want to hear, and to tell them what to do. And so my question would be if that's going to happen, and I don't know.
Okay, so Tom Rees, and then there's another question over here. Thanks.
Sure. Tom Rees from Religion News Service, and thanks, Josh. Hearing from you is always great. Two questions, if you don't mind. You talked about the Italians and the Curia, and yet, there's been an attempt to internationalize the Curia over the last, since Paul VI, really. Has that had any effect on the Curia and its mindset on these kinds of issues? And then secondly, more directed at the Vigano testimony. That is usually portrayed as an attack on Pope Francis, but as you and others who have carefully read the document point out, I mean, there's like a dozen cardinals that he goes after, most of whom served under John Paul II and Benedict, including Sedano, the Secretary of State under John Paul, and Bertone, the Secretary of State under Benedict. Which leads me to wonder, I mean, do these people who are supporting the Vigano testimony, have they actually read it? Because it seems to be attacking the very papacies that they claim to want to return to. It's just very confusing from here, and I'm hoping you might be able to bring some light to what is going on. I mean, he seems to be urging everyone to form a circle and shoot at each other.
I don't know who let Tom Reese in the room. I think you're exactly right. I mean, I think immediately reading the letter, it was clear he wasn't just going after Francis. He was basically going after the entire institution. And he's an Italian archbishop who served, basically his whole life, served the church. He was a key official in the Vatican. He was the head of the diplomatic representations. He basically was in charge of overseeing all the Vatican ambassadors around the world. He then was ambassador to the United States, which is no small thing. It's a big appointment. But my question is, he obviously doesn't like Francis. He thinks Francis did wrong with McCarrick. But to me, the most damning things are about Pope Benedict, about the idea that Pope Benedict would issue some sort of sanctions on McCarrick and then not enforce them. And then basically let this person who Vigano is claiming that Benedict knew was dangerous continue to be dangerous and not pull him from ministry and not inform the people of God. So I don't know what the strategy is there. It seems to me that he's torching the entire institution, which is strange. But there's a lot about the character that is strange. And that's not to say that what he's saying can't be true, but it is to know that who is making the claims. I mean, he's someone who, as Gerard mentioned, arranged that meeting with Kim Davis when the Pope made his visit to the United States in 2015, apparently with very little foresight to what that would look like and how the Pope would be treated. He's also someone who, there's been a lot of weird stuff about his family. The fact that he apparently sold his sister's house without her knowing about it. It's just, there's Italian family drama and then there's Italian family drama. So, but yes, I don't know. But it seems to be that's what he did. Your question about bureaucracy. For me, after living in Rome for 5 years, it's not so much a question of where the person is coming from. It's how long they've served at the Vatican. And I think it's not specific to the Vatican. It's just like any bureaucracy. When you work a place for a very long time, you get used to it being a certain way. And when someone comes in and wants to change the way things work, and you don't understand really what's going on, you might fight back. You might not respond. I mean, I know some Vatican officials who have worked there for 30 years. And Francis comes in and completely changes everything. He decides during the Christmas address, typical Christmas greeting, to give a dressing down to how the Vatican is doing such a horrible job. And I think that's more the issue. It's the people who have been stationed there a long time, particularly with priests maybe very removed from pastoral experience and not realizing what people's lives are like today and what Francis is trying to do in terms of addressing reality today.
So we've time just for one more from the floor, from that lady there, please.
Yeah, Mary Christie, not a lawyer either. You kind of alluded to this with your remark about Benedict in this last answer to Tom Reese. It's kind of a hard question to ask, but I'm wondering if the Pope's reticence to take a stand and to move out more aggressively is in some way a protection of Benedict and what he knows about those situations and himself, which nothing has come out that I've seen, but that there might be some suspicion that maybe he moved around some priests or did something that could be called to be examined.
I'm not sure about the last part about the Pope Benedict moving around priests, but I think there certainly is a
No,
calculation.
this was Francis moving around priests. I'm thinking even Francis, that maybe there were things that went on in his order that he knew about that also could be attributed to him that haven't come out, and that in a way, he's trying to, see how the best way to handle this is.
I don't have any reason to think that that exists, so I don't have reason to say that that would be an issue. I think the first part of your question about afraid of what he says affecting Benedict is very real. Because if what Vigano is saying is true, as I've said, it makes Benedict look very weak. And if if Francis were to release all the files and it was true, even if Francis said he didn't know it was a secret process, that he hadn't been informed, which I don't know if that's possible, but it could be what they say, certainly Benedict doesn't look good. And then Francis is in a very uncomfortable position of revealing something that makes his predecessor, who is still alive, and puts him in a very unfavorable light. And I don't know what the calculation would be for the Pope in terms of when that's appropriate or if that would be too far to go.
Thank you.
Well, before I ask everyone to thank you, Josh, this has been a fascinating conversation, and you've seen the level of interest that people are just to have this need for discussion and answers on this issue. And thank you for your work in bringing the information from Rome to us here and continue to help us understand what is happening and unfolding in the church. To finish off, we're a church of hope. It's a theological virtue. Imagine the church in 50 years' time. What sort of pope do you think will be in place then? What sort of structures will the church have? And what do you think journalists and church historians will be saying then about the abuse crisis and this present time?
Well, they say after a fat pope, a slim pope. I guess we'd call Francis a medium pope. So maybe we'll have a medium pope, a fat pope, a slim pope. We'll be back to a fat pope, I think.
And what do you think? What will that rotund pope be presiding over? What will be the legacy of this period and the reforms that may be forthcoming in the coming months and years?
I guess what I would be looking at, if I'm sitting in 2050, I would be wondering how much the church has decentralized and what authority has been given, particularly to the Synod of Bishops. Because it's clear that that is one of the reforms Pope Francis is most enthusiastic about. The idea of bishops coming to Rome, having a real conversation about what is going on in their diocese, the reality on the ground, and thinking through how the church should be responding and acting. And I think what we've seen so far with the synods in 2014, 2015, publishing of Amoris Laetitia, the Apostolic Exhortation, has been a very interesting beginning. The idea that bishops will come to Rome, not only bishops, but there will be a questionnaire, a process for lay people to have their voices heard, and I wonder how that's going to go forward. And I think that could be an engine for something very interesting, particularly if there were reforms about who attended the synod, who was made members, particularly women, and if the synod were given more I'm going to get hurt for saying this, governance power. Because right now it's an advisory body, it's up to the Pope to decide everything. And if there's going to be some sort of shift. And what's interesting is that today they announced out of the blue for me that there's going to be an apostolic constitution released tomorrow outlining some reforms of the synod process. And so I'm very interested to see what they're doing, particularly because these reforms are coming 2 weeks before a synod. So it's almost like rewriting the ground rules right as they're about to go into function. So I'm wondering what's going to happen, and I think for me that would be a question I would look back at.
Well, on that helpful note, Josh, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much, and please keep up the good work.
Thank you.